Oh, hello, Peds. Welcome to the weekly Hoopla, where I break down the need-to-know news in the NBA. At least usually that's what I do. Today I wanted to stop, take a little bit of this opportunity with the season coming to an end, with the news not necessarily being non-existent, but starting to slow to a pretty big halt, and really only injuries can be the only thing that would truly be groundbreaking at this point, hopefully. I mean, you never know when some really gnarly news is going to pop up in the NBA world, but hopefully we don't have any of that stuff this year. So in this break, I wanted to take the time, now that March Madness is officially over for the ladies and will be over for the men tomorrow night, to go ahead and assess the prize picks of the WNBA in the NBA draft. Now, I don't want to spend the whole time doing a mock draft. That's forever long. That's not really kind of, honestly, frankly, a team is going to have to pay me to get into the 60th man, 100th man on the scouting list for the guy side, and the 40th, 50th girl on the girl side. You know what I mean? It's just that simple. Business is business. I love doing this, but mostly it's very difficult. It's very tedious. And honestly, a lot of the stuff that I think that scouts do a great job at takes place in worlds that we really don't have access to. Like you and I might have the ability to watch tape. We might have a lot of experience in the past, might have actual basketball experience, all that good stuff. But you don't really know the people behind the person, not just the one person either, right? The coaches, the parents, the immediate family, the extended family. You just don't know all of the context for what every kid is going through when they're at this stage in the process. So that's really why I wanted to call this more of an introduction, because I want you to learn who these people are. 4 people in the women's draft that I think are very significant for the average fan to know. And I don't remember how many exactly I ended up pulling from the guys' side, but I think it's about 8 guys from the guys' side that I ended up pulling off on that one. And mostly, again, this isn't to highlight the entire lottery and, to go into a deep dive. This is just a brief introductory course into these prospects. Again, I'm not going to go into too much breakdown. I don't have that ability technologically yet, or the time mostly. Might end up doing some whiteboard stuff on future episodes. But for now, you get the same old book background as previous. So if you're looking for a little bit more detailed, plenty of draft people out there. So again, I think this is more of an introductory level review, and I think this is mostly going to be targeted for more casual fans than the diehards of each and every team. I'm probably not going to go over too much of what you don't already know if you are a diehard, but I do think one of the things that I'll bring a little bit better opinion on, or at least help you get clarity as a basketball fan, is the general questions we have. I think it's very easy and very fun and very clickable in this scouting world, this online scouting world that we've created, to be very spicy, to be to kind of use a little bit of yellow journalism, have a little bit of fun. Because at the end of the day, most of us are going to be wrong anyway. So if you're going to be wrong, you might as well be spectacularly wrong so that the clicks are good. I get it. I look at it more as questions, not definites, right? Because we don't really know any definite with any of these players most of the time. Now, of course, this year's WNBA draft certainly has a very important couple of standout players. And then the NBA draft is a little bit the opposite, where it's going to take a little bit more of a hard eye to maybe identify a true blue star in this group. And honestly, even though the 8th I have here, it may not be the guy here. There might be a guy later in the draft. These things are just kind of wonky, Success is also a very big spectrum. There's title aspirations, there's scoring aspirations, there's financial aspirations. So all of that stuff is important, and that's more of the stuff I'll be hitting on as I go through with each breakdown. So again, if you want to have a more technical, crazy in-depth version of this, there's plenty of awesome people. No Ceilings has done a good job. I don't always love the Ringer's opinion, but they're out there. There's plenty of people. Like I said, go out there, enjoy the content. But without further ado, let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and start with the WNBA side of life. I did have the little logo somewhere, but it doesn't quite fit the new overlay thing I've made for you guys to enjoy a little more eye candy besides just looking at me. So my bad. But I'll fix that eventually, perhaps. For now, let's go back to a little bit of mixing the old way with the new way, right? Caitlin Clark in the WNBA. We're going to pretty much have a very interesting opportunity here for both women's basketball at a professional level and for all of basketball at any spectator level, I suppose, when we start to figure out how much impact Caitlin Clark's eventual, almost incredible, I don't know how there'd be any way for her to be surpassed as the number 1 overall pick at this point by the Indiana Fever. It would be. I should probably get that out because we do have the WNBA draft order. We do not have the men's draft order at this point. As you well probably know, there is a lottery that takes place about a week into the playoffs, usually. So if I think this is a modern one from CBS, April 5th. Yes, that was soon. So that should be the correct order. Indiana Fever will be getting Caitlin Clark, 6-foot guard, taken the world by storm. You might have heard of her. The female Steph Curry seems to be what a lot of people like to go with. Averaged 38% on 13.7 three-point attempts, a very balmy 13.7 three-point attempts. If she has the impact in the pro game as Steph Curry as far as the titles, as far as the winning, that's going to be more of a process of the team built around her. Of course, Aaliyah Boston already being in Indiana is not the worst way to start that franchise up or over again. But ultimately, that's going to take the whole team. Steph Curry is an amazing player. Great player. Would have changed the game no matter where he went. But would he have won titles? Would he have been all of the rest of that stuff? Maybe not titles, plural, right? Like maybe there's a different version of the Steph Curry career that still impacts the way basketball is played, but isn't as successful. Unfortunately, Caitlin Clark will have to take that path because Steph sort of got to have the easier path in a manner of speaking. There wasn't pressure on Steph when he got into the league. There was curiosity, there was opinion, but there wasn't expectation. And then there was injuries that also sort of delayed the gratification of what Steph Curry would be. So while it's fun to talk about her impact and Curry's as the same, it's really just in that volume 3-point spacing, the stretching of the game. That influence, I do think, will be felt. And I do think that she's a very interesting prospect to go after and to look at in this situation because there's a lot more to it here. I mean, this is a girl who almost averages a triple-double. She's a triple-double machine, assist machine when she wants to be. Has carried an Iowa team now to back-to-back national champions. Yes, I'm recording after the game, so unfortunately, Iowa did lose, which I guess, to some extent puts a damper on her legacy. But, look at Peyton Manning. Peyton Manning ultimately had such a terrible career of being the bridesmaid, never the bride, and went into the NFL and had a similar situation until he won some championships, right? Was able to at least get there, especially with the franchise he was playing for. Oh, and guess what? They're both going to Indiana. It's perfect. Either way, there's no point in breaking down who exactly she looks like, doesn't look like. She's a very specific type of player. In a lot of ways, she is the Steph Curry with the way she plays. I would say, with a little bit more of that Luka volume to the possession arrow. But at the end of the day, that will probably change a little bit. It will be fun to see her be a little more off ball because I think obviously with Aaliyah Boston, there's no reason for her not to handle the ball. As great as Caitlin Clark is going to be, I think everyone's pretty safe to say that she's going to have some massive impact. I mean, Sabrina is probably the closest that we've had, and Sabrina's not perfect, but Sabrina's had quite an impact on the W already as well. So there's a limit to guards and what they can really dominate in the WNBA. It's been a bigs-driven league for its entire existence, essentially. But this, of course, could be the draft pick starts to sway that all into a different direction. Again, Sabrina, fantastic player. I think there was a lot of similar hype around who she would be I think it's all fair to say that we feel like Caitlin Clark is a little bit closer to what that hype originally for Sabrina was. And so that'll be fun too, to just watch to see how closely she jumps into her level. Because of course, if you follow the W, you're aware of the Sabrina, love affair with the media. You're aware of how much more popular Sabrina is than most of the rest of the W. And while she's still a really great player, she isn't necessarily in that top 10 level yet, and so it will be interesting to see how Caitlin Clark is both reacted to by the financial aspect of the leagues and how she's reacted to by the fandom. Not just the Indiana Fever fans, who I'm sure are going to be very, very happy to have her. I'm talking about all of the fans of the W all alike. So again, not much else to say. I mean, if you haven't watched the Caitlin Clark experience, you're late. Go to YouTube if you don't believe us. Again, I feel like at this point, she is so popular now with women's basketball. I mean, we're talking about the Indiana Fever's first game against the Aces, the defending two-time champion Aces, the amazing dynasty, one of the best dynasties built in any sport. Essentially, they're getting the license to play in a bigger arena for their game, and a lot of it's got to do with the hype around this girl. It's still a tricky thing, as we look towards the WNBA trying to really capitalize on this, because I think there's a frustration level that's right for a lot of WNBA fans is, why is A'ja Wilson not good enough? Why was Maya Moore not good enough? Why was, there's some names on there. Why are they not good enough to be the face of everything, to help usher in this era of new popularity? And I don't have a great answer for that. You can choose whatever you want. There's a lot of historical stuff that backs you up on that, unfortunately. If you feel like there's a skin tone reasoning, it's just unfortunate, but it's true here. Especially in my opinion in college basketball. I think that college basketball lends itself historically to that. And of course, she's also representing the Midwest, which isn't necessarily a racist thing, but the Midwest, I think it's fair to say, probably feels a little underrepresented as a whole nowadays. Always has that little bit of a, it's East Coast, West Coast. Now it's all South has everything. I think there's a little bit of that just goes into it regardless. And I don't know that it might be racism. I don't know that it's racism. It doesn't matter. It doesn't need to happen in this league, obviously. But it is going to be frustrating if Caitlin has a decent transition, but ultimately we spend most of the next season talking about her progression and not talking about the rest of the good that's happening in the W. We don't want that version, I don't think. Because even when you're great like LeBron, you really don't want the domination to come from that world. You would rather it be somewhat tempered. But that's a perfect world and we don't live in one. So it's going to have to happen. I think she's built for it. I think she's going to be fine. I just think for the WNBA, this is going to be a very tough transition for a lot of people. And of course, Caitlin included. And we should probably talk about the back-to-back championship losses in a different context. But I guess for me, it's pretty simple. Indiana or Iowa did a great job building a really competitive team around this girl. But they're not. That's not their bag. They're not perennial. Teams. They're supposed to meet a bigger, more physical, more talented group, especially in how the women's game is. Women can roster stack successfully in college a little bit more than men. In men, when you roster stack, it's not as great because these guys are one and dones. The chemistry thing. For the women, they roster stack and they stay. And most of the time, you just get a better group here. So they did a really good job of putting a back-to-back team together here. But both years, you fall victim to SEC schools that are just so damn dominant. LSU came out of nowhere last year. It was an impressive way for them to kind of get back into the mainstream, the Kim Mulkey thing. It was just a fun one, but they were a very physical group. They were able to take advantage of Iowa in that situation. This year, I think you got to give Caitlin Clark some credit. You got to give Iowa credit because they were always kind of competing for number 2 anyway. South Carolina was just dominant. I mean, dominant. We'll talk about one of their bigger pieces to finish this up, but holy crap. I mean, they just out-physicaled her. And that is going to be, and not just her, the team, obviously, that is going to be the thing that we all pay attention to when she gets to the W. How does the physicality every night, the athleticism every night, change how successful she is at what she does? My guess is it's going to dampen it a little bit in the beginning, but great basketball players usually find a way. And I don't believe there's anything fluky or, I don't believe that we're watching, a future bust or a future, even just starter player. Like, I think that everything Caitlin Clark does will translate. I just think that there is also a version of the WNBA that exists that it's going to make it tough, at least for the first couple of seasons, I would imagine. But will she end up leading the transition to a game that more favors her? That's kind of where I think a lot of people are betting it'll go. So we'll jump off of that horse. We'll talk about the second player in this WNBA draft that pretty much is the consensus number 2 overall player, and most likely would be the number 1 overall player had Caitlin Clark stayed an extra season like she was allowed to. Cameron Brink. Cameron Brink's 6'4" forward, incredibly talented rim protector, 11 rebounds a game, 3.1 blocks a game in 4 seasons at Stanford. Has been a big-time winner. I think one of the best traits that I've seen when you watch her play is she has that Bill Russell, I guess I would call it the classic Bill Russell, where you don't just block to block, you block to retain possession, and then you also push the ball forward in tempo. I think Draymond Green does a great job of doing that in the modern game. Cameron Brink, I think, will end up being a great pick. We didn't see a lot of her this year. They got bounced in the Sweet 16. She fouled out in the game. It is what it is. She's a bit thinner than what a lot of your WNBA bigs are big. They're not just beanpoles, but Brink obviously has a bit more skill, a bit more shooting that she can add to the game. Obviously that's going to change how things play. And of course, as we move in, as we tease the Caitlin Clark era, as we already look at some of the young stars of the WNBA as it is, you can see a faster, more skill-based game. And I guess I mean that by shooting, because I've always thought the women displayed better skills than the men on average, because I think a lot of times our men basketball players fall into laziness with the athleticism. Whereas, frankly, women are great athletes, don't get me wrong, but they're not built 6'8", 270 and can take off from the free throw line. You know what I mean? They're not they're built with much more limitation than the men athletes. So when that happens, especially as they grow in their younger years, I think that causes a much better skill to set in, because it has to be there. We see this with smaller guards in the NBA or at the college level all the time. It only makes sense it happens for both ways. So again, you have a very talented girl here in Cameron Brink. You have another possible window into another era, a more spaced out era of the W, which, I think is a long time coming. I don't think that it's anything too concerning that the W hasn't mirrored the men's game exactly, but it really has basically anyway. It's just on its own pace. It's on its own version of history. These two things are not meant to exactly replicate each other. They're two different journeys happening at two different times. They're going to take two different ways to get success. And I think this, again, is a great opportunity for the WNBA. I think, again, you look at a draft where you have Caitlin Clark and Cam Brink back-to-back. You can't be any more excited than that. The third player we'll talk about, I think, is one of the ones that I was a little bit more suspect on. Again, I'm not going to consider myself much of an expert. In fact, I don't do the WNBA Hoopla, or I haven't covered the WNBA too much in the Hoopla prior to this, because I do still sort of want to sit back for a year, so gather more of that context, watch more of these games, because, it's just not something that I've lived with my whole life. We've had the W. I've watched when I could. Never really had one in our city, Houston, or in our state, most less. Houston was taken from us a long time ago. And then we didn't get it back until Dallas got the Wings, 7 years ago now, I guess. Maybe it might be already be a decade of Dallas Wings basketball. But either way, a lot of that stuff just, for me, it stopped in college. I grew up in Waco. Baylor was a big deal for me. Not necessarily as a fan, but as being that close to that powerful of a program, it was pretty awesome to go watch some of those games and see some of those amazing players. Basically got to see the whole Brittany Griner era as it was unfolding. Sophia Young was one of the first ladies that ever really inspired me to watch the game, men or women. And so it's just one of those things where I still learn a little bit all the time. Rickea Jackson was one of those where, I see consensus. Everybody's got her here in the top 4, locked into the top 4. I mean, for the most part, at 3, which would be to the Chicago Sky. I didn't mention earlier, Cam Brink would be going to the Los Angeles Sparks, from Stanford to LA. And the Sparks need quite a bit of they need a little spark, pun intended. And she's perfect for that. So Rickea Jackson, you're talking about a really talented 6'2" forward here. You got a slasher with respectable shooting skills. I think you've got a girl who also has a desire to play big, a desire to kind of get into the probe into the lane, get a little dirty with it, and get and score against bigger ladies. And that's kind of good to see from the 6'2" side of things. I mean, 6'2" in the WNBA is not that small, especially for the forward, but there are some big ladies out there, 6'7" ladies. I mean, our Dallas Wings here locally put McCowan and Kalani Brown out there regularly, you know what I mean, in a very, very big lineup, and had success with it. Asia Wilson is only 6'6", but is just athletic as all hell, has that extra length, shuts down the whole thing. So 6'2" isn't that big a deal. And again, playing big is not a bad thing at all. I think, you'll see really talented wing kind of players like this dominate. I think there's Diamond DeShields was pretty good at this for a little bit. I know I'm forgetting another girl's name who kind of reminded me of this, where it was just realistically a lot of guard skills. But when it comes to scoring, and this is common with W and with women's basketball, we watch men's basketball thinking the 2 guards going to score, and it's going to, essentially try to stretch out the court a little bit. And probing will just be a part of certain plays and basically keeping defenses honest and keeping motion on the court. It's not a bread and butter kind of thing. But for, the W, this is different. And again, Rickea Jackson is a big, strong girl, so she can get in there, play a very smooth, controlled pace, and then score against bigger opponents. And again, with the W still being big, you could maybe even argue that she could be the most impactful of all these girls right away. That's saying a lot with Caitlin Clark on the board, and Cam Brink for that matter. But I mean, you could see a world where this version of the WNBA, it sets up more for her success right away. And then Kamilla Cardoso, she is most of the time being projected as the number 4 pick. She would also be going to the Los Angeles Sparks at 4. My Dallas Wings pick 5, and they pick 9, which is like, all right, it's fine, but the top 4 being so interesting this year, I'm not gonna lie, I was kind of sad to fall out of that 4 there. Cardoso is a 6'7" center, so you could maybe also argue that unless the Wings are looking to move on, that maybe that's not the position they would go for anyway. But only, I think put her name on the biggest part of the stage for most casual fans by hitting their first 3 of the season to bank in a game winner in the SEC tournament. She had a little bit of an issue with the brawl. If you heard about the brawl between South Carolina and LSU, she was pretty much one of the bigger escalators in that. Not the instigator, but she was the escalator. Don't love that in a vacuum, but as a WNBA player, I kind of like it. It's a very chippy league. It's anybody who's got stupid stereotypes about the game have not watched it. It's a very, very chippy league. There is a lot of physicality in that league, and I would not knock Cardoso down too damn much for that situation. I mean, really, when we're talking about all this stuff we've spent this first 20 something minutes talking about the W, it's big. The bigs still dominate because the rest of it's still sort of developing and turning into something a little bit more explosive, a little bit more. I would consider it entertainment, because there's a version of basketball like college plays it, men, women, whoever your athleticism level, where you play very based in a set. You slow the tempo of the game down. You do all of these strategic things that make, for winning basketball. At the highest levels, the entertainment levels, where this product is just as much about entertainment as anything else, you want to see more excitement. You want to see the women lean into this stuff, even if, there's a lot of curmudgeons that are going to be like, but the integrity of the game. Yeah, I get it. We always have to watch the integrity of the game, but if there wasn't all the revolutions in the men's game, it wouldn't be so popular either. So the women obviously also are going to continue to revolutionize their version of the basketball. And I promise you it will yield great results, because I think that it's naturally, the game is very interesting. It's very, I think it emphasizes creativity. And I think that's sort of the blessing that this thing has, and it feels like it's probably always going to be evergreen, because there's so many different ways to reinvent the wheel in basketball and make it sort of look a little different, make it a little more fun, a little more whatever, modernize it for that time. And then we debate eras, and that's just sort of what it is. Either way, back to Cardoso, classic rim runner type, classic low post beast. Dominant season, dominant championship game. Iowa had plenty of chances to get back into this one as it went. It was a tight game, most of it, but every time South Carolina pulled away, it was almost always because Cardoso was just eating them alive in the paint. If bigs matter so much, is this about talent or size? I think that's an interesting question, because I think for Cardoso, this from a box score standpoint, which again is shallow, and I'll explain better with the men. Her numbers are good, but because it's South Carolina, because of the way she's come up, it is a little inconsistent on paper, and that makes me wonder if it's a little bit more about size. Yeah, but if she's just put it all together, she's a young girl. You know what I mean? This is why it's kind of funny the way that we'll spin different things. I mean, they really can go 50-50 at this point in someone's career, especially with this much success. So does she get lost in the shuffle in the W as it progresses into a more shooting league, or does she dominate the way she's dominated in college basketball because she's more prepared for it, and because it lends itself right now as a product that lets the bigs sort of impact a little bit more? Wings, I think too. I think, and not, I don't mean that is the Dallas Wings. I wish it was, but not always there. But wings, the type of, the forwards, your bigger guards, whatever you want to call it, the floor stretchers as it is now. To me, I feel like they really dominate this game a lot too, at least most of the time. But again, it kind of comes back to A'ja Wilson. You know what I mean? It comes back to someone at that level that it's like, okay, but how do we take this away from her? Because like she's a good offensive player. I would say above average, borderline elite offensive player. But it really only is probably considered elite in my mind because she does it just enough to make up, or just enough to do what she needs to do. And then this is A'ja Wilson, to dominate the absolute shit out of the game, because she's almost always defensively dominating a basketball game. So like I said, the bigs matter. The rim protection matters. There's a lot of driving to the cup, and a lot of contested shots at the rim. So Kamilla Cardoso probably had the best season of all of these girls. Obviously, now that she's got to have the big trophy, but 4 really talented WNBA players to come up with. Like I said, Dallas fans, we've got 2 picks in this first round. I don't think there's a world where you'll be able to trade up for a player. Stranger things have happened, but especially with old Sparks having 2 picks, it's not impossible. I just don't necessarily believe in it at this point, especially because the roster is pretty good. How do you make it better? That's just kind of the bitch of where you are in a rebuild. It's like, we're chasing, and it's a 12-team league. The number 1 team is loaded as hell. The number 2 team is pretty damn loaded as hell too. So it's easier said than done when it comes to rebuilding yourself in the W. But that's enough for the W. Time to get to the National Basketball Association, Mr. Jerry West's logo. Let's go. It's time to talk about the 2024 NBA Draft. Now, again, I kind of just dabbled, poked around, found whatever I could that I thought was, consistent, at least. Some people that I trust. Honestly, I even went to sources that were sort of upstarters like me, because I really don't care. I'm interested to see people's opinion. I don't think there's a right or wrong answer most years, usually, but this is a year where it's particularly not really a right or wrong answer of where you have anybody. As you can see below, the first player I'm going to mention is Zaccharie Risacher from Francais. He's 6'9". He's a 6'9" forward. You're going to look at a player with box scores all over the place. And I would say none of those box scores really jump out at you as starter stuff. But remember, playing overseas, it's a little bit different. These guys are not necessarily, the stats don't compile the same way, right? It's a different pace of game. So you're just not expecting those to look like that. But the inconsistencies are more notable here in the box score. And I like to do for my evaluation, obviously, I kind of want to know what the person's genetic profile is. That's why I list it down at the bottom here. But the box scores are a good way for me to start getting an idea of what I want to watch for when I'm going to the YouTube stuff. Because the best way to do it is watching game tape, no question. But if you don't have all that time, and if you're doing something just kind of introductory like I am here, hitting the highlights isn't the worst idea, as long as you know what to do, what to look for, what not to look for. And again, box scores are kind of where I start with that. Box scores kind of let me know, okay, well, this is a weird inconsistency. Okay, this is this. Okay, this is this. So now, I can, like I said, I can look at the 3-point attempts mostly. That's a very important one, and say, okay, on tape, I'm seeing 3 points made. I'm seeing a competent, good-looking shooter. But this record shows me that this is far but inconsistent, and that this tape is lying to me a little bit. Even if that's not who that player is going to be, that's where people fall into the trap of watching a tape and be like, that dude could shoot. And then you look at the chart and you're like, data says that it can't. And the data is not always right. But in that situation, it's important to note because obviously you're evaluating the future prospects of the player, and you kind of need to know an actual good baseline where they're at, not just sort of a suggestion. So again, production data is not great. Not great in this particular player, but everything else looks really nice. I think he looks like a modern NBA player, by all means. Very lanky 6'9". He's comfortable off the dribble. He's comfortable on the break. That's kind of the baseline stuff. Back when I was watching basketball as a kid, there were guys you just straight up weren't allowed to dribble the basketball, basically. Nowadays, we've really sort of moved away from that problem, which is great. It's a very embarrassing problem to have at the highest level. And so, again, Risacher, very talented, very well-taught basketball player. France, here we go again, doing a really good job of producing quality talent lately. I see makings personally of a higher level role player. I think that this is somebody in that Trey Murphy land, the Keegan Murray land, where I'm like, man, I really like this prospect alongside my star. I think they can produce off without the ball, and I know they have the size and athleticism to dominate on the defensive end. If and here's the issue with defense, and here's why I honestly don't even care how much you watch defensive tape on these people coming in. Now, I don't think you should watch no defensive tape, but I don't think that it always is a great measuring stick, regardless of what is on tape. Unless it's Olay defense and, you're probably looking, and you had a situation where the coach is frustrated, then you kind of get a different version of someone's character maybe on tape. But really, we're not expecting the world from their defensive abilities coming into the NBA. it's almost always a net negative. Wembanyama, obviously, this year has changed that a bit. There's been some guys in the past as rookies who have impacted highly as a defensive player, but it really doesn't happen much because the speed of the game is different, because the talent of the game is different. The everything has to adjust in someone's brain, no matter how good they are. So for me, it's more important to see the athleticism and the size, the capability, and then we find out over time, how much desire they have to actually be a great defensive player, because it takes a lot of work and discipline, and not God-given talent. Like I said, I think it's very difficult to see Risacher being an all-star, like perennial all-star. I mean, you can make all-star once a year or once in a career, but at perennial all-star, no. So when I see him as the number one overall pick in a lot of people's mocks, I think there is a part of me that questions that. Rob Dillingham is going to be like the kind of other player around there. You start to see, you're like, the Alexandre Sarr. Like, you'll see as we go, there's a lot of names you'll see at number one that all sort of make you look at yourself and scratch your head, because it doesn't look that promising as far as your clear cut, that guy is an NBA player kind of thing, which we've had in the last couple of years with Paulo, with Wemby. I mean, it's we're usually very fortunate in this aspect. This not the case this season. So like I said, Risacher, I like him a lot. I mean, hell, if the Spurs get him, that's amazing. I guess I should get Tankathon out. Let's just pop Tankathon out, and let's get a little fake simulator here. All right, boom. Washington got the number one pick in my little simulator, and I mean, you already have Bilal Coulibaly. You need more size and length there anyway. I don't think Risacher shows me number one overall player. But if you got him, I guess, I can see where that would fit. But like I said, I think that if you take Risacher as the number one overall player, I think you're playing it safe and probably overlooking a better talent on the board. But I could be wrong. All right. Rob Dillingham. This is a name you'll probably see a lot. It's a name that some of us might have gotten familiar with, as this is, I think, the only Donda Academy alumnus to make it this far into the hoop world. If I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. But Rob Dillingham is a very interesting 6'2" guard, very fast, 45% on 4.3 three-point shots a game. You kind of have to love that in the modern NBA. However, the assist numbers all over the place. I don't know how much I love that, since like you're kind of a small guard, so I kind of need you at the one, but you kind of play more like a two. But that, it does sort of make me cautious. I would say he's the definition of a quick twitch athlete. He's got it coming out of his eyeballs. But he kind of has the, for lack of a better word, I think he's going to have to beat the fuckboy basketball player allegations. And I don't mean that by what he does off the court. I mean on the court. The isolation, the can he exist in team basketball consistently and at the highest level? All of those things I think is going to be fair. Is he going to be more Tyrese Maxey? Is he going to be more Emmanuel Quickley? I'll be honest with you. I think he's a little more Emmanuel Quickley from what I've seen. Again, 6'2" guard. So he's going to be a one on the defensive side of the ball. I don't think the length is enough to go play higher up. But the athleticism is there. So again, if the willingness is, the defensive side could be met there. But it does feel like watching Dillingham, he does feel like another version of the AAU product of, I've had the ball my whole life. I can score like a mug. But like, what else? There's other stuff. There's other basketball stuff. And there is other basketball stuff. So if I've got to be honest, my gut would tell me that Rob Dillingham is going to succeed as more of a bench role scorer than as a primary starter. I'm always hoping to be wrong. I always want to see people, succeed to their highest level. I mean, that's the fun of watching this and being a fan of it. But the reality is the history of the position, stuff that Rob Dillingham can't even control, is not fair to him, but it's reality, is that we've seen a billion dudes come into the NBA like this. I know you can score. I know you can score, but I need more. I don't think he's, I don't think there's going to be a worry about him not making it in the NBA kind of thing necessarily. But, obviously, if he's got a more tempered expectation, if he's drafted number 2 overall, which I don't have him as my number 2 prospect. I was just lazy and wrote these names down in no particular order. And again, if you have him number 1, number 2, that's fine. I just don't know how you look at this type of player and feel great about his ability to be good enough to be a great starter on a team, to be the best player on a team. That kind of stuff just doesn't feel like it's there to me. It feels like this guy right here would be awesome to have off my bench. And I could make him a lot of money and it'll have him a lot of success, a lot of good numbers if he bought into that role. But as far as where it goes beyond that, I have a very difficult time believing that. And you have Charlotte here in my version of this with the number 2 overall pick in my Tankathon simulator. So I've got to be honest with you, that would be not ideal for Charlotte either. So let's move forward as we go. Again, I'm not doing any particular mock draft. I just have that up for fun. Alexandre Sarr. This is someone who's been number 1 on a lot of boards throughout this season. He's a 7'1" center. I would consider him to be a lanky motherfucker with some bounce. That is something that is always going to be nice to have in the NBA. He has shown some mild success stretching the court, but I would not say that he's anything more than capable. When you look at the box score, it doesn't quite fit what the eye is telling me when I'm watching the tape. The tape is trying to tell me that this man is stretching the floor a lot, and I think that's fair that that's how they're using him, and I like that. I'm happy for that. But I don't think that there's enough data to show me that I'm plugging in and playing him in the NBA and he's going to be good, or you know what I mean? And by that I mean on average somewhere in the 30s, right? Like at least to start, where it's not some putrid level or some crazy jacked up shots number. But the other thing that I love, because stretching the court is important. It matters because of how matchups go in the playoffs a lot. It matters because, you need to be able to defend as well as you can score. And with Sarr, I think that's probably his best attribute is he looks athletic enough to guard all 5 positions. I don't know that he can actually guard all 5 positions. I don't know that I love the NBL and the competition at that level, at least not to be concrete on things like that. But from what you can see, he is 7'1" and very agile, which bodes well for his ability to cover a lot of different players. Again, stretching the court's amazing, but the dirty work is kind of what you love. He's a classic rim runner to classic line of lob threat. You got to love the back-to-the-back offense a little bit. I think if you have a lot of confidence in his back-to-the-basket ability, that's where you can really push Sarr to the number 1 pick. And then if you really love what they did with him as a facilitator in their offense, then you'll love this guy, and he'll obviously be the number 1 pick on your board. For me, I really enjoyed how they used him. I thought he did a good job. I just don't know that it was, again, proof enough for me personally that it's slam dunk translatable. Because there was also a version of watching his tape where I was like, is this just not like a longer PJ Washington, Is this not just Jabari Smith Jr., I think, is another talented young player that kind of fits this mold where it's like, hey, this is a lot of talent, and I'd love to have them on my roster, but there's not enough of the other stuff that's like, okay, well, this is the number 1 overall pick, and I can, supplant my franchise around him. But again, that's the theme of this whole draft class is it's very inconsistent. It's very tough to gauge who should be the clear number 1 pick and who shouldn't be. And a lot of it's going to come down to who's picking. In this situation at number 3, you would have the San Antonio Spurs. I think they would look at Sarr on the board and say, thank you, have a nice day. But again, they may find one of these other guys that I'm going to name to be just as interesting. Even if they're the number 1 overall again. There's a very, very unclear path to the order of this draft. Reed Sheppard. We'll move into the next one. This would be Utah's pick if they were to take it. Again, I'm not doing this based off of my big board. I'm just sort of hodgepodging this all together. Reed Sheppard, 6'3" guard, 52% on 4.4 3-point attempts a game. I think that there's an inconsistent impact on the game, but I'm not sure how much of that is Kentucky, how much of that is him. That was sort of some of the things that you were hearing about Kentucky if you were going to pick them in the tournament. Of course, I did, and I look like a fucking idiot. So if you know how the tournament went, you know Kentucky didn't do well, or didn't do what they should have done. And so here's a situation where that inconsistency sort of got to shine on the biggest stage. So now where you had people that were even, I think at one point even kind of projecting him to be the number one pick in the draft, are starting to have them fall back a little bit. Let's bring him back down to a little more reasonable level. Again, I don't think that a lot of people are going to have him at 4. I just kind of had him here because of my laziness and where I got to them on my list. I would say he shows all the great signs of being an elite NBA shooter. So obviously you love that. He's got a high release point. He's got a consistent base of his shot. He's fucking lethal off screens. So, I mean, you're talking about the 3 things that you love to have. But then it's like, okay, so are you JJ Redick? Like, what, and we love to have those kind of guys in the NBA. They're very valuable. They make a lot of money now. But at the same time, they're not the top 5 pick. Sometimes these guys aren't even usually lottery picks, even if we're dead set and sure on who they are. Like look at Jordan Hawkins last year. I thought Jordan Hawkins showed a lot of that and has lived up to that potential to some extent when he has played for the Pelicans this year, but ultimately he fell beyond the lottery or just at the cusp of the lottery, I think. And a lot of it was because you're a great role player. We know that, but it kind of feels like that's it. You had to like the fact that he was confident probing the lane, attacking the lane. He had a lot of success at that. But then again, he still seems more like a 2 than a 1. Then that starts to impact the defense because it's like, yeah, you're 6'3", but are you know what I mean? How stout do you feel about that 6'3"? I think he's actually a pretty stout 6'3". It just, again, it's like you're guarding 1s, probably not being able to guard 2s. So then it's, you start to become a little bit more niche. You start to become, your use starts to kind of be a little more specific, and that's not always great in this situation. He did good things defensively in college, but now it's like, can that translate to the next level with the athletes, with the shooting? And then even if you like that, does it kind of worry you that it looks more like what TJ McConnell or Jose Alvarado do, which are both very impactful, but aren't necessarily, stoppers, right? Like, it's like they make themselves more valuable as bench scorers and bench facilitators by being very pesky off the ball and using their brains and attacking the moments they get them. I see plenty of that in Reed Sheppard's highlights. That's awesome. That shows me an IQ. That shows me a lot of different things that I like to see. But again, it doesn't really fix the fact that I'm going to have to figure out how to cover for you on the defensive side of the ball. There's different levels to it. James Harden, Luka Doncic, they've had these knocks of defense, but they're big dudes. Like, I can make it work as long as they try. You know what I mean? And then obviously they do so much shit on the other end that it's like, it's fine. It's fine. It could be better, but it's fine. In this situation, I don't know that Reed Sheppard is that kind of player. I think, again, you're looking at a nice role player, maybe even a high-value role player. But I don't see anyone that, to me, looks like the turning point of a franchise. Again, we'll see. Opportunity allows people to shine, but I find it difficult. Moving into someone who is doing a very good job of trying to boost themselves into the number 1 overall pick conversation, Donovan Clingan. I think 2 years ago, he was a pretty solid player in the recruiting process. Went to UConn, was kind of buried behind their talent. They won a title as he's just a role player on the title team. This year, he takes over as the main guy. He's a freaking huge dude. He's got 2.5 blocks a game as a senior. He's averaging 16 points, 9 rebounds, 3.6 blocks, a steal, and almost 2 assists a game in the tournament so far. One more to go tomorrow for the big natty game against Zach Edey, who I don't have on this list. But obviously, looking at Zach Edey as someone who's hungry to sort of jump into the conversation of the lottery, maybe even just cement himself as a first rounder. Clingan's going to be a great opportunity for both of these guys to sort of test each other's mettle and put on a show for the scouts. I would say that Clingan is a non-shooter, but there's some film of him looking decent at doing it. I would even go as far as saying he's naturally a little slow of foot, but not so badly that it's like Edey, where I'm really kind of worried about it. It's just like limiting. And it kind of makes you fit the Jonas Valanciunas, comparison. Jonas was very talented. I think he was when did Jonas get drafted? Jonas was, I think Jonas Valanciunas was a 5th overall pick. Yeah, so he was a big deal when he came out too. I think that feels right for Clingan. I think they're very similar, big ox, strong guys. Really, really dudes who I think you can trust in the regular season. But it's like, ooh, do I have to game plan around having them? Does he have enough ability to, sort of help on switches in a way that doesn't get him played off the court? So that does matter to me. I would say, again, does he take that shot level to a threat level that's respectable enough? I don't know. That sort of confuses me with it. It's a very flat-footed Al Horford-esque shot, so I'm not too worried about that. It's just the consistency of knocking it down. I think you've seen somebody like Miles Turner who's similar, where it's like, I know you can shoot, but I don't trust you to do it when I need you to all the time. And that's kind of the difference between someone who can average a decent amount and then someone who I'm like, I know your average is nice, but like, God damn it, be more comfortable. UConn used him as a facilitator a lot, similar to Sarr. I think that's really interesting because he did a lot more of it than Sarr, and I think he was really good at it. I thought he did a lot of reads that is kind of why UConn is very successful. They have a lot of motion on their offense. They have a lot of plays where he's high up at the arc in a fashion that I think if you're familiar with the pro games, you see Tim Duncan, Nikola Jokic down there at the bottom. I would also include Bill Walton historically as guys who are just insane. When you put them up at the top of the key, you start to allow them to, pay attention until you start to allow all this movement around them. And then they're basically just this big, tall skyscraper getting to read everything. And I think for Clingan, there's some real success there. And I think that if that, again, like Sarr, is as intriguing as the rest of what he can do, that could be what pushes him to the number one. But again, my caution is similar with Jonas. I mean, Jonas Valanciunas has done an amazing job of both coming into his career and being who he always was, developing well and being successful, as well as starting to shift his game into what the actual NBA was becoming for increased longevity. So we like Clingan a lot for that, but we also have to be fair and worried a little bit because, that's what makes Wemby so special is the dude is massive, but he's agile as shit. And again, that's why Sarr is a very interesting pick. There's less offense perhaps with Sarr. Damn, there's a lot of defensive upside with someone that agile and that long. Nikola Topic. He was the number one pick at some points. I think there's a lot of buzz for him to be the starting point guard of the San Antonio Spurs in the future, but we will see because I think for me, I'm still a little iffy on all that. I do think that he's a really talented player. I think that he's a 6'6" guard is what he's listed. He kind of feels smaller than 6'6". So I don't know. I would be interested to see what the measurables come back to when our guys start to go over and have conversations with him, or he comes over here rather. And I do find these guys really hard to scout. I thought with Luka, I was like, man, this guy's killing people. But I was like, this athleticism can't work in the NBA. What is this? You're going to get killed. But of course, what we've learned with Nikola, with Luka, and it had been before, but I think we really learned it with those two, is controlling the pace of the game almost negates some of that athleticism issue in a really real way. I think you have to trust his ability to control that skill and that tempo. But I still sort of have my question there. The ABA, the place he plays in, the league he plays in is a very talented league. I would say it's a really good mix of size and skill. I would say it doesn't have a lot of top end height. And again, that sort of makes me wonder how much of the success he'll still have when we have so much bigger on average players, especially now. This version of NBA is getting tall again. So you definitely have a little bit more concern about that, especially because the tape shows you a guy who can shoot. If you go watch some Nikola Topic highlights, you're like, this guy can shoot. You go look again at the box scores, and you're like, I don't know if I want this guy shooting. The numbers that are on low volume, the games that he's got low volume, it looks nice. When he's shooting a little bit more than desired, it does not really look like he's ever had much success, at least not this season, because I didn't go that much into the depths. But that sort of intrigued me in a bad way. But other than that, you do have a really interesting guard who can control pace, who's really good with the pick and R, the PNR action. Very much a Luka clone in a lot of ways. I would say a little smaller than Luka, obviously, in a couple of different ways. A little bit more fits the Drazen Petrovic build, but does not shoot the ball well enough to get on that level, for my opinion. But hey, the two former, all those extra Yugoslavian guys, we realize now are it's paying dividends with those fellas laid in the groundwork in the 90s and the 80s, because man. The former Yugoslav may not exist anymore, but holy crap, does it still keep producing? And I don't know that Topic is going to be the number one overall pick. I don't know that Topic is an all, I think he'll be a starting level player. I don't think that that's a misread. But again, we're going to test that metal on the defensive end, which is why perhaps San Antonio does make the most sense, because what's better to, control maybe a bit of an issue, liability point guard than 7'5" freak athleticism. I don't know. What could be better? So I think that for San Antonio, they do get a little bit of a cheat code when it comes to this. And that's why they'll probably be attached to Trae Young rumors in the future, is you may be able to argue that they don't have to deal with the same issue that everyone else does with these prospects, because they have a cheat code. And that's just kind of how basketball works, especially at the highest level. I mean, you can be really good at drafting, you can be really good at developing, but history shows you need one of the guys you see around you here. You need that guy right there, especially. You definitely need that guy over there. I still think you need this guy, but the old version of this guy. I still would like to see Russ get one. Love you, Russ. That's why you're there. Timmy, obviously, Timmy. And then the other three there with LeBron, James, you know what I mean? You're talking about the king. And then you're talking about big ticket. Big ticket didn't win a ton of the titles. Probably should have had two. Didn't get that second one. No offense, RIP Kobe, but probably should have been, if healthy, a two-time champion. And then, of course, Nikola was just fucking basketball wizard, Mr. fucking all everything now. And I'm not meaning that in salty in a hater way. I just am still stunned at how dominant Nikola Jokic is. He's that much better than even we could have, even 3 years ago. He's just double better somehow. Whew. A lot of people hoping that happens with this particular guy, Matas Buzelis. 6'10" forward who unfortunately decided it would be a good idea to trust the G League Ignite with his development. If you don't know about the G League Ignite, they don't exist anymore. They have been taken away from us. They won 2 games this season. They had Ron Holland and Matas Buzelis, 2 guys who before this season started were kind of 1, 2, 3, top 5 on almost everybody's boards. Now you're looking at Buzelis, who's fallen on most people's boards out of the top 5. And then you're looking at Ron Holland, who's fallen almost as far, if not farther. I don't have him on my list. Even though he's a talented player, I just don't find him as interesting. I think what I tried to do was limit the guys who I thought, Stephon Castle, interesting prospect, role player. I don't even need to see much more. Role player, good role player, but role player. Those kinds of things. I felt Jacoby Walter, really like Jacoby Walter, role player. I tried to find the guys who I think have the potential for the highest upside here. At least at the top of the draft. Of course, we never know. Jalen Brunson's happen every now and again, even though I felt like Brunson was a little more obvious, but those things happen. So Matas Buzelis, again, I would call him a 2K ass athlete. I think that's exactly what people go out there and try to build. He's like a longer Franz Wagner. I would say that his numbers aren't great. I think it was 28% from three, but when you watch it, it does look like a good shooter. I think that the issue for the G League Ignite was that they were fucking awful, like absolutely atrocious, like some of the worst collective basketball you could ever put together. And I think his box scores show that a lot. I think there's going to be some smart people who put a lot of effort into scouting Matas, because I do think that if you kind of take away and absolve him of most of the problem with the G League Ignite, which I think is fair, he might be the clear number one overall pick, because the upside with this particular player compared to the rest of the table just doesn't feel like it exists. Now, 6'10" forward, we always get crazy about that. When they're 6'10", they can put the ball on the floor, we go nuts. So is there overreaction? Yeah, I think maybe a little bit there. Like I said, 2K ass athlete. But I thought he was a very controlled player. I thought he had a lot of energy. I thought that even in games where they're getting fucking killed, which was a lot, there's effort. You know what I mean? So when you take that much length and athleticism, which the athleticism is what it is, he's a really, really ferocious dunker. I don't know that I think that he's got much of the agile, like lateral stuff that you would need for the defensive end, but the 6'10" part matters a lot. So imagine the Spurs, like I said, imagine the Spurs getting this guy where you have just this unimaginable length across your court now. And then adding, like, you already have Vassell there, who's a lanky ass too. So like you just have a very long group potentially if you were to make that move. And that's why, again, I think Matas Buzelis will get the benefit of the doubt. And though everyone's kind of pushing him down the draft right now, I think it will get back up to him. Because honestly, by the time I got through a couple of highlight films of this dude, I was more thinking, like, looking at those box scores as I'm watching, like, this dude's already ready to play for the Portland Trailblazers. He's already ready to be a Washington Wizard. Like, he's already had to do it for a year. I honestly don't hate it. I'm like, fuck, this guy's already kind of had to been through hell. I think he seems like he's fine. I mean, he's had some fun competition. I think he was the guy who was like, I'll take anybody one-on-one to prove who my slot. So like, that's already brownie points. You know what I mean? Like in the NBA, come on, bro. We love that shit. Even if you're selling us a bunch of shit, we love that. So really high on Matas Buzelis. And I think, if it was me at the number one overall pick, I think I would be leaning towards Matas. I think that I would ignore the crap. I would ignore the upside of some of these other guys. And outside of Alexandre Sarr, there's no one that moves me as an elite athlete like Matas. And I know that that's a little annoying, a little stupid. But the NBA, it really is a little bit more about athleticism than skill, at least at the beginning of things, because we can develop you. I mean, if you get into a good situation, you can be all world no time. But of course, most of these guys won't be going to good situations because that's not how the draft works. So there's a lot of variability. We can only predict the one side of this for now. And that's Buzelis. So I kind of saved him for the last here. He's not my actual last. I did put Isaiah Collier here. Isaiah was the number one overall player for most of the year, or a couple of years. And he shared a backcourt with someone pretty damn famous this year, Bronny James Jr. Neither one of those guys, I think, are Bronny. I don't have on this at all. for obvious reasons. Like, I think Bronny's a really good player. I think he's probably still a late first, early second round kind of talent if he chooses to stay in the draft. And I think that his athleticism and his intellect, I think, is enough to be like, that guy can be on an NBA roster. How much time he'll crack probably will take a year or two, or some opportunity popping up, but he's an NBA player. He just isn't a star. He's not his dad, right? Isaiah Collier is very difficult, though, because Isaiah kind of falls under this Rob Dillingham version of American guards who sort of have this really nasty stereotype, especially on them right now. Very meh 3-point percentage on a low volume. It kind of gives you Dennis Smith Jr. vibes a little bit when you watch the tape, where you're like, oh yeah, this dude's an ATH, as they put it in football. But you're kind of worried about the rest. You're kind of like, what else is there? I think the passing is good. I think the passing is the saving grace here. I think the passing is probably what keeps him from sliding all the way out of the lottery, which is what I've seen him projected at in certain cases, and was why I wasn't going to spend a ton of time on him here. But, every year we sort of do this. We have a complete, we have a number one overall guy who just throughout the year, the process sort of pulls the strings out a little bit, and we feel like, okay, well, actually, you're more of this kind of guy, if we're being honest. So, not that it's a complete knock on his future here. I just think that it's notable. It's something I like to do. It's something eventually I would love to do for YouTube, for my website, is to dive into these prior classes, the scouting version, not the draft classes, and really look at the progression, the politics, the all of the kookiness that goes into high school rankings, because they really don't do a great job of predicting the future all the time, even though people in basketball are like, oh, of course, LeBron James, number one player, he's number one all time. Paulo Banchero, number one. Wemby was American, number one. So it's one of those things where it's like, I know that we have a lot of exceptions to the rules. I have many of them on my screen right now, but like even Russ, that's not who Russ was. It's not who Duncan was really until later on. Nikola got drafted during a fucking Taco Bell commercial. So these things happen. These changes often happen. And I remember the first year I went to UNT, we had a guy who was supposed to be the number one overall player at one point, and he just wasn't serious. You could watch him. It was like, oh, this dude's big. He's athletic, 6'8". He can hoop. Right? Right? We were still in the Sun Belt then, dude. I went to every game that year. Oh, he got drafted in the second round. I don't even think he played more than 10 games in the NBA. No clue where he went after. Oh, it's tough. It's tough. And I thought for me, I was like, oh my God, so lucky I get to go to UNT and I'm get the best basketball player they somehow get because of transfer, because of some crap. And then it's just like, this is the reality of amateur sports in America. We don't necessarily give all these kids the best opportunity to their foot forward, and we don't always have the most dedicated guys at the top, especially at that point, because, if you mature earlier than everyone else, if you were taller than everyone else, I hate to break it to you, people just push you into a direction, and then that is usually, sometimes made worse by the outside forces that are relying on you financially, right? Like it's really not fair for a lot of these kids. So Isaiah Collier falling down some boards pretty drastically from where they started this season, where he was almost the consensus number one overall for a lot of people. Would love to see him battle his way back. I think from the genetic side of life, he's going to test well. That'll help him. Maybe he gets into some live play in the draft combine. Probably won't, because I usually don't. But if you could, I think that would be nice. But it does feel like Collier might be one of those situations where even, a middling team. I already deleted the tankathon. I already cut the tankathon off. But, maybe a middling team just outside of lottery or at the end of the lottery sees him as a saving grace. I look at the Pelicans. What if the Pelicans continue to falter and, they end up not making through the play-in or whatever it is, and then they're kind of picking in that middle again, and knowing that position is really sort of glaring on their roster. It's like, so it could be a blessing in disguise for everybody. But that's the fun and the chaos of the NBA draft, the WNBA draft. Again, we'll be excited. I will come to either the Hoopla or to the main pod with a full breakdown of the W draft as it goes down. That, my friends, I should announce because I want everybody to watch that. I want there to be a more a bigger interest into the women's game. So April 15th, I knew it was going to be soon. That's next Monday. Next Monday, we will be getting new WNBA players. Caitlin Clark will officially be a part of the W. And, you know, I will still keep everyone updated with the Hoopla as we go throughout the season. I don't exactly know how I'm going to play the WNBA into the playoffs, into the past. I might just wait till the end of the playoffs and then jump into the WNBA post-finals and get caught up that way and help you guys get caught up. So we will see. But stay tuned. Thank you guys so much for getting through all of this like you do all the time. It is very much appreciated. We are trying our hardest to pass the rock to give you guys better content each and every time we step in front of a camera. And so please like, subscribe, share, shit talk, praise, whatever you feel. Get out your heart. Let your pure heart and soul. Got a crush that you can't talk to? Do it in the comments of our post. We love to have it. We like to be that place that brings you together, that brings you to the happiness. Deuces, Hoopheads.